Well, good morning everybody and welcome to today's meeting. It's the Children, Adults, Health and Wellbeing Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel, and I would now like to say welcome to everybody, and I'll ask everyone on the panel to introduce themselves to you. I apologise for not having name badges in front of us this time, but I'm sure that will be resolved for our next meeting. So, my name is Dina Romero, and I am the chair of this panel. I'm also a councillor for Southdown in Bath.
Good morning. My name is Liz Hardman. I'm the vice chair of this PDS panel, and I'm also the Baines councillor for Horton.
Michelle?
Michelle O'Doherty. I'm a councillor for Newbridge Ward.
Good morning, David Harding, councillor for the Chew Valley.
Hello, I'm Alex Byrne and I'm the councillor for Keynsham North.
Hi, Paul Crosby, councillor for Southdown.
Hello, I'm councillor Joanna Wright. I'm a councillor for Lambridge Ward.
Kevin Burnett, I'm a co-opted member of the NHT.
It might be also useful to indicate if you're a voting or non-voting member.
Oh, sorry, non-voting member.
Thank you, Kevin.
Christopher Batten, National Education Union, non-voting member.
Thank you very much, and we're supported in this meeting with Kerry.
Yeah, good morning, Kerry Williams, Policy Development and Scrutiny Officer.
And Mark.
Good morning everyone, my name is Mark Durnford, I'm the Democratic Services Officer for the panel.
And then if we can just quickly go around to our officers.
Hi there, I'm Paul Scott, I'm Associate Director of Public Health at Baines Council.
Morning, Mary Kearney-Knowles, Director of Children's Services for the local authority.
Morning, Becky Reynolds, Director of Public Health for the local authority.
Good morning, I'm Sally Churchyard, Head of Young People's Prevention Services.
Hello, I'm Heather Anderton. I'm the Police Sergeant for the Early Interventions Team, which works with the Violence Reduction Partnership.
Good morning, I'm Sophia Mackenzie. I'm the VIU Coordinator for Baines and apologise for being late.
Absolutely no problem. I'm delighted that you're all able to be here. I just think it's quite interesting that officers are as far away as they possibly can be. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to Mark to tell us what to do in case there's an emergency.
Yes, great, thank you, Chair. So, if the continuous alarm does sound, you must evacuate the building and proceed to the assembly point. From this room, you follow the green one person signs to the exit, using either the marble staircase or the main staircase. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point for this building is the Orange Grove grassed area, just outside Brian's Restaurant. There is also an evacuation chair for use by disabled people who so wish in the corridor outside the Council Chamber Public Gallery. Alternatively, the area at the top of the marble staircase has been designated a safe refuge where persons needing assistance should assemble. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And are there any apologies for absence or substitutions?
Yeah, just a few today. So apologies from Councillor Mansell, who's a member of the panel, Cabinet Member Councillor Paul May, and our representative from the BSW ICB, Laura Ambler, is unable to attend today.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so declarations of interest. Does anybody have anything they wish to declare? Thank you. And so item 5 is to announce any urgent business, and I have not been alerted to any. Okay. There are no members of the public or the councillors here, so I'm not expecting to receive any statements or petitions. And then we move on to the minutes of our last meeting in July. So may I ask if these are a correct record of our meeting of the 10th of July? Yes? Okay, and all those in favour? Okay, thank you. All those against, or anybody who wishes to abstain? Okay, thank you, Joe. Okay, So the Cabinet Member update. So we've had this circulated to us, Obviously, we won't be able to ask any questions of the Cabinet member as he is not here. It might be worth in future asking that if a Cabinet member can't attend, that we have... Sorry, Kevin.
Apologies. Did you want me to raise those 2 points for the minutes or now, or matters arising, that is?
Okay, let's move back to the minutes, and I'll come back to the Cabinet member update in 1 moment. Yes, you're quite right. I didn't leave space for any matters arising. So, are there anything that is not included in the on this agenda that you wish to raise?
Please. Yeah, I think there was nothing in the ICB around the Urgent Treatment Centre and the RUH. They had amended services from the 4th of September and just wondered how it was going. And in relation to that Urgent Treatment Centre, a question on page 10 was asked about the number of students using that Urgent Treatment Centre. I believe the other question around the COVID investigation is being dealt with and is coming up in January.
Did you mean in relation to the COVID work? Or? I'm not sure yes. Yeah, unfortunately, without an ICB representative, I'm not sure anyone's got sort of the right information for you. Sorry about that, Chair.
Right. I'm now moving on to Cabinet member update. And Joanna.
I have questions for her.
Okay. So on the Cabinet member update, I'll just finish the sentence I was started just a few moments ago. I would like to request that if we don't have the Cabinet member in attendance, or if they're unlikely to be able to attend, that we ask another Cabinet member to attend to answer the questions, as this, after all, is a cabinet-to-cabinet, so it is a member-to-member scrutiny panel. Thank you. Right. So, are there any comments or questions on this paper? Councillor Wright.
Yes, looking at the figures that were sent to full council in July 2023, it's quite clear that the children's services is over budget by 2.3 million, and particularly this seems to be linked to unaccompanied asylum seekers. I'm assuming that this meeting, we're not going to have another children's session until the next one will be adults. So at the following one, could we actually have a paper on what is happening and how are they going to deal with that massive budget overspend that we are facing? And following on from that, the schools' budgets for special educational needs is hugely over as well, and I would like some more information on that and that process, and also on the home to school transport, of which we spend over 11 million each year. It seems like there have been major costs, 7%, which goes with inflation. How are we dealing with that? And it's quite clear from the papers that they're reviewing the contracts at the moment, so how do we look into those matters? So I appreciate the Cabinet member isn't here, there is no member to have that conversation, and we have budgets being set for next year. Can we have at the next Children's Scrutiny Panel information on those three key subjects, which is a huge cost to this council? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. It may be that maybe Chris or Mary might have some comments, but absolutely we can put that onto our work plan for that meeting. So if I ask Chris and Mary to come back on that, and then I'll ask you, Paul, for your question.
Yeah, we're more than happy to bring a paper to the next Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel on those 3 areas. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mary. Councillor Crossley.
Yeah, can we ask, first of all, I think it's a shame that Cabinet member's not here, but can you ask for more information about what's happening with Culverhay, please, from the Cabinet member for the next update?
Okay. And similarly, is there anything that officers would like to add as in response to that?
Yeah, just again, as Mary said, happy to bring an update with more information to brief Paul so they can bring more information back here on the Culverhay site beyond what's already in the updated members' report.
Thank you. Kevin.
Thank you. Following on really from Joe's point, there was a mention that a sentence around there's 1.2 million of savings this year, and just wondered how that's going to be achieved and is that still possible? And the second question was really around the same sort of thing, but will we reach the point when costs, and that includes staff burnout and the pressures on staff, simply mean the service quality has to fall?
I think that's a very good point. Chris or Mary, can you make sure that that is addressed in?
Absolutely. We can address both of those with Councillor May.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments on the Cabinet Member's report? I should have said this at the beginning. He is actually unable to attend as it's following an operation there. So I would hope that we would all wish him well in his recovery. Can we make sure that those are passed on? Thank you.
Despite the comments, I still think it was a very good report, and I'd like to thank him for it.
Maybe that can precede our wishes for his recovery. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Okay. Item 9. Just checking. Yeah, fine. Is the Baines and Swindon and Wiltshire Integrated Care Board update. So we have received this paper. Obviously, we've noted that Laura is unable to attend. Were there any comments from the panel on this paper? Kevin?
Excuse me, yes. Particularly around dentists, 2 questions around the dentists. One, it seems to imply that now they have the commissioning, the ICB look at the commissioning for dentists, that they just want to know if they're responding to the new contracts, that it seems that they're being negotiated at the moment, or seem to be the key problem before. And also then around the map and the coverage, and I believe it was already mentioned to a previous panel meeting about possible mobile services and how that might support the coverage across the whole of Baines. And the fall in adults seems significant. The number of adults going for dental care, and is this a particular, how's that being remedied at the moment? And I presume it's all NHS and not that they're not seeking anything, but is it just NHS that we're talking about? And finally, nothing to do with the report, but to raise, please, that I've sort of heard that there may be on the ICB a SEND representative has to be on the ICB, and I'd like to know about the role of that representative and what they actually do and how they liaise with all the other elements of SEND. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that Becky or Paul? Will you be able to pick up any of those questions?
We'll need to pick them up with the ICB, I'm afraid, with Laura, because all that is commissioned through the ICB in terms of healthcare, in terms of dental provision and NHS dental provision. But I've written down the questions, and I'm sure they'll come back through Kerry and to Mark as well. In terms of SEND representation on ICB, do you know anything about that? I haven't heard it.
What I can say, Kevin, is that the Director of Nursing and Quality has the lead for SEND in the ICB. So she would sit on the board, but whether she sits in terms That's the context we would know. So she does sit on the ICB board. So that's Jill May, who's the Director of Nursing and Quality.
Sorry, is that an actual... Does she know that she has this particular responsibility for being given to her, as it were? Right,
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
I just want to pick up on the NHS adult dental care situation. I myself have found out recently that unless you have been to your NHS dentist as an adult within 3 years, then you lose your place. However, what has happened is that an awful lot of dentists, after COVID, sent out letters to their patients telling them that they were now moving to become independent companies and therefore they were changing their arrangements. So lots of people therefore did not think that they were still able to attend as NHS dentists. Therefore, lots of people have not gone to their dentist because they didn't think that they could anymore because they were no longer in the NHS. I found this out myself by taking my son to the dentist and asking questions. And I have now written a letter to the dental practice and asked for full details on this and who else has been affected by this on a wider level. So there must be many more people who, like me, have encountered this situation, therefore thought that they no longer were an NHS patient and just stopped going and thought that they couldn't afford NHS dental, non-NHS dental care. So is that the reason why we have this reduction in numbers?
I think that's a question I'm afraid I would have to go to Laura Ambler.
I would like that taken up, and I'm very happy to share the information that I'm challenging and emailing people on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and really good points, Councillor Wright. I was just wondering also, and I will come to you in a second, Councillor Hartman, one of the questions, I suppose, that we've been asked is to consider the underlying causes of access difficulties, and it may be that this, is a wider brief than we can, really address, and whether or not it's really appropriate for us to address it here, is another question. But I wondered whether or not we can find a way of having a member of this panel sit within the ICB structure, particularly around dental care. And if that is possible, then I would like to suggest that Councillor Wright is somehow considered for that position. Okay, can I leave that to officers to resolve? Yes, Kerry.
Just as background, we've been contacted by Swindon and Wiltshire partners to request an informal discussion about how we approach scrutiny of the of the system, ICS, because our focus to date is on place. So that meeting's happening in early October, and I think that's one of the things that we can work through when we have those discussions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hartman.
Thank you. In the report, it did mention many aspirational ideas and implementation plans about how it's going to improve dental access in our areas. But really, when I have questioned dentists as to why they no longer operate as NHS dentists, because obviously some months ago I had a number of residents who contacted me to say the National Health Service dentist was not operating as a National Health dentist anymore, but privately. They say they are not paid enough for NHS dental care, and this is the crux of the problem. So I would like the ICB board to explain exactly what do they mean by we've got these units of dental care, but I've been told by dentists that they just get paid for one unit, which can cover up to 12 treatments. So I'd like, if we're going to try and address this problem, are dentists, being our National Health Service dentists, are they going to be paid more? I know it's a government thing, and therefore, obviously, it's a national thing, but as our Integrated Healthcare Board is now in charge of commissioning, maybe this is something that we could ask them to take up with the government as to why dentists who are operating within a National Health Service need to be paid more. I mean, dentists say it's not worth their while. They have to pay reception, buildings, etc. They have to pay all these costs. It really is the government now who needs to do something about it. But also, we need to know as a panel exactly where the costs are when they break them down to units 1, 2 and 3. I do think it's good to hear that also the Integrated Care Board are going to issue new contracts for NHS primary care dental activity in areas of greatest need. It's a really good aspiration. And also they're going to develop plans to commission dental services in areas where there is inequality of access. And I would ask for more detail. If they're saying that they can't attract dentists to this area because of various considerations, that they're trying to get dental school in Bristol to get more people to stay, to offer more grants, etc., will they have enough money to target these very, very important ideas about tackling areas of greatest need? So they would be my questions to put to the ICB.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hardman. Any response from officers, or should we, Becky?
Thank you. Just one very brief response. I think this is an opportunity in time, because up to recently, NHS dental services were commissioned by NHS England regionally, so it's a regional approach. We're now going back, in a sense, to an approach that we would have had before 2013, when the local NHS commissioned local dental services. So there are things that the ICB still can't change, particularly that aren't within its scope of influence, which relate to the contract and payment mechanisms. But in terms of identifying areas of greater need and thinking how it can attract or look at provision of dental services, this is an opportunity, and it's certainly something that we will pick up in terms of being able to work much more directly with our ICB now, as opposed to with the region, because it's also an interest to directors of public health in terms of the oral health of children, young people and vulnerable adults. Thank you.
Thank you. And then going back to my earlier request of how we can be better involved in this work, and I think this picks up again another point that we were asked to consider, which is how we can work in partnership, and attract dental and other clinical workforces and encourage young people to consider a career in the NHS. I think that is all part and parcel of that greater involvement. Okay, Councillor Wright.
Just bringing up from the previous situation with the previous chair, we had sort of tentatively agreed that there could be a cross-party motion within council to raise the issues that Liz has just put, that we send to government, that we aren't satisfied with how they're treating dentists and dental staff and costs, etc., so that we then make that a priority as a council, so that we build on that. So I just wonder if within your role as chair you could start looking at maybe thinking about a cross-party motion that we could take forward to council on this issue, because it's important to all of our residents that good public healthcare for teeth is in place, and if we are losing dentists because the government aren't paying them properly, this is an issue that we need national government to understand is a real problem.
Yes. So I'm just going to see, are we all in agreement that we would like to pursue that? Okay. Thank you, panel. Thank you for the suggestion. Councillor Wright, Kerry.
I think what we will need to do is go through the executive lead for this, because what we can't do is even though it's a cross-party, scrutiny it has to be non-political in it, whereas council is a political environment, so we just need to be careful. So we can work it through to make sure it works, but I think probably have to go directly to the cabinet member and then with that request, rather than scrutiny taking a motion to council, which it isn't allowed to do.
I think reading what Councillor Wright was saying, it was to find a mechanism, a way of putting that motion to council. So I think your words are fine. Okay. Any more questions or comments on this particular paper? Okay. Now we will move on to the next item, which is the Youth Justice Plan, and I'm actually going to ask Sally to introduce this in one moment in the absence of our Cabinet member. But what I would like to say is in future it would be useful, or more useful, if this paper could come to this panel before it goes to Cabinet, just because I think that's a better a better way of doing this, to have it come to scrutiny, then to Cabinet, and then to Council. It feels a little bit like it's a sort of tick-boxing exercise that it's come here at this moment. But anyway, over to you, Sally.
Thank you. I'll just make a brief introduction and then happy to take questions. As a statutory plan, it does, as the Chair is indicating, need to go through Council and as part of the Council's policy and budget framework. It needs to come here as well as to Cabinet and full Council. The plan is produced every year. It sets out how we work together in a multi-agency partnership to prevent youth offending. And the priorities in the plan this year, which feed directly into the work plan, are fourfold. The first is to strengthen participation. And this has been a continuing priority for a number of years because our work is most effective when children and their parents and carers and the people that they've harmed are actively involved with us in designing and delivering responses to that. If children are actively involved, we're much better able to identify and address their needs. A second priority is to address disproportionality. Again, a continuing priority because for a number of years, both locally and nationally, we see children from some ethnic backgrounds, particularly those with a mixed or dual heritage background, and children with special educational needs, all overrepresented in the youth justice system. Our third priority is to embed child-first principles, and this is a really interesting way in which the youth justice system has developed over the 20 or more years that it's been in place. We now are encouraged by the Ministry of Justice and the National Youth Justice Board to regard children and treat children who come into the system as children, and to put their needs ahead of identifying them as young offenders. There is a very strong evidence base for doing this because if we're meeting their holistic needs, they will be less likely to offend. But we are shifting some of our terminology. We now talk very much about children rather than young people in order to identify that these are people who have particular needs. Not just for safeguarding, but for us understanding every aspect of their experience and how that might impact on their behaviour. And then the fourth priority is to address serious violence. Again, a new priority for us, but not new work. And it marks the introduction of the serious violence duty, which we'll be thinking about in a moment. The Youth Justice Service is unusual in that it is a specified partner in its own right alongside major public bodies.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sally. So, do we have any questions or comments? Kevin?
Yes, thank you. A question in the report is around the reoffending, the children looked after. The percentage seems very high, and I was surprised that it was an issue given how much work is done around looked after children. And can you say something about who takes the lead in caring for those and actual what preventative measures are in place to support the children that are looked after?
Thank you. I suppose I would caveat any questions about our data with a reminder that a very good thing that we are working with very small numbers of children, and so sometimes percentages look very high. They can be misleading because we're only talking about a handful of individual children. Children looked after are amongst the most vulnerable children in our authority, and the reasons that they've come to be looked after are often very similar to the reasons why they are offending. The local children's social care service remains their principal workers, and they make the key decisions and support them. But we do work very closely alongside them and wherever they come into the justice system, they will have a lead worker from the Youth Justice Service as well. If they appear in court, they will have support in person from their social worker and also from the youth justice worker. So I'd want to assure panel that that work is very closely planned and delivered together. We have within our service 2 prevention projects now. One is called Compass, which panel may be familiar with because we've offered that for many years, and that's a service for 8 to 17-year-olds who are recognised as being at high risk of offending. That may well include some children looked after. And since just before Christmas, we've also been offering the Turnaround Project, which is a new Ministry of Justice funded piece of work for children who are right on the cusp of the justice system. So they have had an encounter with police. They may have been released under investigation. They may have been dealt with through an out-of-court disposal process. Or they may have been charged to court and perhaps their case was acquitted. Or perhaps they were fined but didn't have any intervention alongside that. So these are children not just at risk because of their circumstances, but who we can see through their behaviour that they are at risk. So we offer those 2 services within the Youth Justice Service. But there are a range of other prevention projects both within the council. Connecting Families do work with children and families where there's a risk of offending. Although they wouldn't normally work with children looked after, but they might be part of a pattern of support for children as their status might change. And we also commission services.
Thank you, Sally.
Sorry, could I just ask a quick follow-up? Is that number stayed high, or is that comparatively falling, or is for the number of looked after children reoffending?
It's always been proportionally high, and not just in this area. It is because these children experience such obstacles, and there have been a number of research projects that have looked at the same factors that bring them into the justice system as meaning they need to come into the care system as well. If anyone has a particular interest, I can forward a link to some of that research.
Thank you, Sally. I think that would be an interesting link for all of us. So perhaps you could forward it through to Kerry and Mark. Thank you. Councillor Hardman.
Sally, thank you very much for a very, very thorough report. And it's good to note that first-time entrance into the youth justice system is low, and that the frequency of reoffending numbers are also low. And it's great to note there are no custodial sentences. There are no young people from Baines in custody. And hopefully the difference in figures between the Youth Justice Board and the local data might get sorted out eventually. It's obviously just some IT glitch there. But obviously I'm going to come back to the old thing that we come back to every year, which is disproportionality. And I just wonder, could I just dig a little bit deeper? What are you doing that's different now? So, for example, on page 61 of your recommendations, you say that that progress was completed in looking at disproportionality, but it's a continuing piece of work. So what were the recommendations of the Avon and Somerset Criminal Justice Board in identifying disproportionality? So has that changed in any way? And can you name some of the ways these were incorporated into the relevant work plans now for the future? And I'm sure I'm following on with what Kevin is probably thinking about, that you've done a huge amount of work in identifying permanent exclusions and attendance at alternative provision schools are some of the reasons why disproportionality exists. And is there any work that you, perhaps the police, might be doing to address this if children are permanently excluded, but they really are in danger of offending? So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the issue with data is very frustrating. There are going to be some changes coming up where the Youth Justice Board has agreed for some of the key performance indicators to go back to use local data. So it will make better sense, I think, going forward. Yes, disproportionality. something, again, we've had a concern about for a number of years, and not just in our system, but represented across services, and children who would benefit from more support because of the discrimination that they and their families have faced earlier on in their years. The particular piece of work you're referring to followed on from the national David Lammy report into disproportionality in the criminal justice system. That was published back in 2017, and he did highlight a particular concern about children. The local Avon and Somerset Criminal Justice Board commissioned a piece of work to take a closer look at what was happening across all services, all parts of the justice system in Avon and Somerset. That was published as a report called Identifying Disproportionality. It is still owned by the local Criminal Justice Board, but the Chief Constable, Sarah Crew, has undertaken to lead the response to that. It makes a very large number of recommendations. I think it's 83 recommendations. So police and partners are putting into place a significant framework to respond to it. There will be a youth pillar, which is going to be chaired by my colleague in South Gloucestershire, and she will be looking at some of the specific recommendations to do with children, including that will be a place, as they develop the terms of reference, to look at the interface with local schools and settings and local inclusion services within councils. There are some specific recommendations about comparing our data and trying to understand what happens to children. Clearly, children excluded are at, they're very vulnerable. They are at greater risk of offending if they are not supervised. There are arrangements for them to be supervised, but if they choose not to cooperate with that, at risk of attracting attention, being groomed in the community, mixing with people that are going to lead them astray. And we do see that happening, and exploitation is a big part of a small number of children's experience here. The other work that's recommended in the report around children is looking at out-of-court disposals and how children are treated before they go to court, and that work stream is underway. It's being led by DCI Larissa Hunt, who's chairing a group with youth justice and police colleagues to look at learning across the 5 local authorities to look at streamlining some processes, and to particularly look at greater use of a disposal called Outcome 22, which was actually recommended by David Lammy back in 2017 as one way that children who have perhaps less experience and less confidence of the justice system, and therefore might choose to go to court rather than admit an offence, can be dealt with in an alternative way by deferring any decisions about prosecution and offering support to them at a very immediate level. And we are seeing an increasing use of those disposals in this authority now. The way the work plan is laid out, it does link the different actions with both that Identifying Disproportionality report and also with a thematic review that was undertaken by HMI Probation probably 2 years ago now, I think, where they looked at the experience of black boys, particularly in the justice system. And so we have worked on that together. We have taken that to our partnership board, and it is continuing work. We will not address everything we need to do in 1 year, maybe not in 5 years, maybe not in this generation. It is continuing purposeful work that we remain committed to.
Thank you, Sally. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions, Kevin?
Apologies if I've missed this somewhere. And I know you say there's a lot around this, but a little while ago, I understand there was a funding for a pilot-type project through the Home Office to do with supporting schools and avoiding exclusions. And I just wondered if that sort of work is was successful is still part of what you're doing or part of your preventative framework, and how it actually is carried out?
You may be referring to something we've been doing through the Violence Reduction Unit, and now called the Violence Reduction Partnership. The origin of the funding was Home Office. It came down to us through the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and the funding was used to appoint a worker at a strategic level to work with schools to review their policies and practices around children at risk of exclusion and children who'd been excluded. And that included looking at it strategically, but also operationally, providing support with individuals. The funding also enabled us to make an appointment of a key worker who undertook direct work with children and families for a set period of time to address some of the issues that were placing them at risk. The funding was finite. There was some success within some of those individual children, and the strategic support to schools was very well received, so much so that the local authority has now agreed to make that into a permanent post. And that worker took up post at the beginning of September, end of August. So we are continuing to work with him to see what more can be done. We don't at the moment have that additional key worker support. But it's very much because engagement in the school is such a strong protective factor and exclusion is such a risk.
It may well be that links with the next two papers on our agenda as well. So thank you, Sally. Does that answer your question, Kevin? Yes. Okay. Joanna.
Thank you for your paper. Just asking for clarification. When you say schools, you mean state schools and not private schools?
We actually work with all schools. I mean, we have different kinds of relationships with different schools, but particularly some of the work of the Violence Reduction Partnership, we've recently had some good engagement from some of our private schools. And of course, we also work with colleagues in alternative provision.
I just know the percentage of private schools in Bath particularly is significant of number of pupils attending them. So therefore, and thinking about what I've heard about what happens on the street between different groups of young people, children, that there is a certain socio-economic element taking place amongst that activity. And I just wonder if there's a bit more information that we need to know about socio-economic base as well.
Well, it might be that work could, or that question could be picked up in the work of the violence reduction and indeed the knife violence piece as well. But
certainly, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. It isn't something perhaps we've looked at very hard, although I recognise what you're saying. And as the next paper will introduce, we are currently undertaking a strategic needs assessment, so we could fit that question quite readily into the work we're doing there.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you, Councillor Wright. Any more questions on this paper? I would like to just pick up on one point, which Kevin referred to, which was about looked after children and the disproportionality of them being within the youth justice system. And I wonder if this question could also be considered at our corporate parenting group as well. And, how we can, better work collectively on this. Okay, thank you. Okay. Right, so our next paper is the violence reduction update. Sally, would you like to introduce this report? I apologise, I've got you to do three papers all in a row.
That's all right. That's quite all right. Yes, this is the third time, I believe, that we've brought the issue of serious violence here. Initially, the panel was very interested to have a scrutiny day when we understood that the council would be subject to a statutory requirement to work with partners to address serious violence. There are a few comments in the update reports. This is the third report we've brought, just to say what's been happening in the last 6 months. Clearly, it is still important to remind panel and public too that this area continues to be an area of comparatively low offending and comparatively low reported serious violence. That's not to say for 1 minute that we're complacent about some of the issues we face, but it's about putting that into a context. The impact of serious violence is devastating when it happens, and sadly we've seen that over the last year. So we are working as a hub and spoke with the local Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, where they are the hub, and the 5 local authorities are spokes. And we've been working since late in 2019 to address serious violence in that framework. The new legislation will take over from the work that we're doing, but we hope that that can be achieved as a relatively seamless transition, because the requirements under the legislation are very much to continue working as we have been doing as a violence reduction unit, taking a multi-agency annual view of the level and nature of serious violence in our area, and working together to respond to that with agreed actions across a wide partnership. Because this issue is it's one of those wicked issues. It's very difficult to identify single causes, and there certainly are not single solutions. And we will only make a difference here if we work together at every level across a very wide partnership. And that's what the statutory guidance is recommending, that we take a public health approach, and we view this very much as a preventative agenda. So services like the Youth Justice Service that we've just been thinking about will work with children who have been directly involved in serious violence. And I would note many of them have also been harmed by others through serious violence. So it's a messy picture in a sense. We're not talking about a binary people who offend and people who are harmed. But we, through a public health approach, want to be looking much earlier in families' experience, in families' journeys, and work with colleagues across early years settings as well to understand how we can collaborate around a pathway that identifies from some of the published research risk factors and concerns that may make it a bit more likely that a family will be harmed by or will produce a member who gets involved in serious violence. We've had to do quite a lot of unpicking because of the new legislation and stitching back together. And we've done that with an organisation called Crest Alliance, who've been appointed by government. They have taken a look at our local arrangements, and they're happy with what they've seen. We have also separately procured their services as a partnership in Avon and Somerset to support us on a journey of transitioning from the violence reduction unit to violence reduction partnership. And that means taking another look at the strategic and operational arrangements in place and the use of the funding that continues to be drawn down from the Home Office. They have also been helping us with a series of workshops where we're actually looking at how we implement the duty. And that's been alongside colleagues from fire and rescue, from police, from health, from who else? Probation, youth justice. I've lost one. Who have I lost? One other. One other. No, there is another. I've just lost it for a moment. But they have all been part of the workshops and part of the work we're doing to identify the way forward. This report summarises some of that, but a lot of it is kind of back office arrangements that are imperative in order that we can then operate to deliver the requirements in the legislation. The report also talks a little bit about some of the local provision that we're able to continue until at least March 2025. So, yes. that's a kind of overview. I'm very happy again to pick up questions.
Thank you very much, Sally. And as ever, I think the work you do in this area is to be commended. It is quite phenomenal. So, panel, any questions or comments on this? Kevin, and then Paul, and then you.
Yes, thank you for the update. A quick question around, if I've read this right, section 311 was around consulting young people in October, November. Is that this October, November? And how are you aiming to do that? And have you already consulted with them, and do you have a database around young people and how they perceive the issues? Excuse me.
Okay, I will start to answer that. I'm also going to highlight that Paul Scott is working with the Violence Reduction Partnership and will be chairing a subgroup going forward that's looking at how we compile the next strategic needs assessment. So Paul, do chip in if you'd like to do that. No, the arrangements described in this report are for this autumn. We have a deadline of the 31st of January to publish our next strategic needs assessment and a strategy to go alongside it to show how we're going to respond. That is likely this time to be a fairly top-level strategy, drawing on some of the work we've done before, and it will be an iterative process over the next few years because we are required to review it annually. So we have started, there have been 2 focus groups held so far with staff, and we are talking with probation, with social care, with youth justice about the best ways to consult with the children and young adults that they're working with about their experiences. We are hoping some of that will be done face-to-face. We've also been advised that children may respond better to a questionnaire that they can do alongside their trusted worker. Paul, did you want to add anything?
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, I think there's something about there's real benefit, isn't there, in talking to people and trying to get a wider range of insights matched with being proportionate about how we do that, and also whether we can continue some of those conversations as we then go from needs or issues that people have identified into what do we then do about it, so that you can continue some of those conversations rather than just ask people something and then go away and come up with some plans. So, as Sally says, we're kind of in the process of doing that at the moment, and when we come back we'll be able to, I guess, give more information about quite how that's happened and also the plans that have been produced as a consequence.
Can I just ask, is that then just people within the system, or is that wider scale with Youth Connect workers and various other people and generally education and people? Because obviously it's a cultural thing as well, seemingly, and a much wider impact than just those that may have been caught in it.
Yeah, it is broader, isn't it, that we're a bit trying to say more, Sally, but yeah, taking a broader approach. I don't know if you want to say any more.
Yes, we need to consult with as wide a range of people as we can because everybody is affected by this agenda. If not directly, then they hear things on the grapevine. People carry a level of knowledge, they carry a lot of misinformation as well. And so the consultation is an opportunity to really engage with them about what they're hearing, what they know, trying to tease out what is actually evidenced, what is just damaging talk that's out there. Our coordinator, Sophia Mackenzie, is working to look at the detail of some of that. We've been talking about the different groups that we hope to work with. Youth Connect Southwest is certainly one of them. Mentoring Plus is Project 28, Off the Record, and some of our statutory services in-house as well. Sophia, you don't have to, but I don't know if you want to add anything.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is that alongside that we're also looking to put some of the survey back to schools so we get to engage with a level of school children that's both in independent schools and into our vein to look at voter schools.
Thank you, everyone, for your answers on that one. Councillor Crosley.
Okay, Thank you very much, and thank you for all the work you're doing on this. On the report, to me, the key ones are 311, 312, 313, but we've got two recommendations, and they're basically just for noting and noting and noting. And what I wanted to do, and I'll start at the end of the debate and then come back and say why. I think when you come back next time, we don't need a report that just says no, no, no. We need a report that gives us some goals, some targets, and some achievements, so that we can measure progress against you. But in 311, 312, you've got a lot about identifying vulnerability, and you've said we actually know a lot of this already, and that's correct. We've gone through several things over the last few years, such as the county lines and drugs, and you talk about links to domestic violence and links to sexual violence, and they're sort of different areas. But to me, what I would like to know is how much of our serious knife crime actually does physically come from seriously distressed families and families that are under serious stress, and what I'd like more detail about what the linkages are on that, rather than just saying that's someone else's report. And so I think, therefore, since 2019, you've been working on this. So in the next report, I'd like to just see what we've done that leads up to where we are, and from where we're going, I'd like to have some targets and goals going forward, because I think this is an important area, and you're quite right. Here in Baines, we're very lucky that it's very low. So therefore, another question I'd like to ask is, how much of the violence that we are getting is external violence as opposed to internal violence, because that's certainly one of the rumours that I pick up on the street. And secondly, is there any evidence at all that the violence is escalating to include implements that are potentially more dangerous than knives? Thank you.
It may also be that some of those questions will be picked up within the work if we go forward with the Task and Finish group.
I think that's absolutely the case, but I'll respond, and then if Sergeant Anderson wants to say anything from police point of view, please do. Contained within the report are the national metrics that we're required to report on, and they've been in place for some time. That's measurement of homicide rates, hospital admissions, and police recorded knife crime. But we are invited to look at setting local targets as well, so it's a timely question, and they will arise out of the strategic needs assessment when we understand better what is happening in our community, and learning from people about how they feel we might be addressing that together. Yes, it's probably fair to say that the children we work with who've become involved in knife crime and other serious violence are from families that you describe as being under stress. They are children who perhaps have not always engaged well or been well engaged into school, and do experience a number of difficulties. Certainly those who come into the youth justice system, we do identify a level of trauma in their experience, and some of them are eligible for a trauma recovery project that we deliver alongside 3 other local authorities, such as the level of their need. It's difficult to talk about the 3 fatal stabbings we've seen in our area. Only one of them so far has a court outcome. But I can say that none of the people being investigated or dealt with as a result of that are Baines children. So it is a complex picture. We obviously work closely with those 4 other local authorities in Avon and Somerset, but we also work with colleagues in Dorset, in Wiltshire and in Swindon. And we are interested to look, it's one of the questions we want to explore in the strategic needs assessment. Why are children travelling and committing offences? Why are children coming into our area and committing offences? And which of our children are travelling to other areas, and are we seeing anything serious happening in terms of their offending there. I have to say, from the Youth Justice Service point of view, I don't think that is currently happening. But they're certainly travelling, but we're not seeing those devastating outcomes at the moment. There is a lot more we need to understand. And we need to understand how much of this is initiated by children themselves and how much, again, has exploitation and county lines perhaps lying behind it. Even if not directly with some of the specific offences, how much has county lines affected what is seen as normal by children? And, you know, are we seeing a level of normalisation of using knives as a result of their experience of being exploited? We don't know that, but it is something we're very keen to be talking with children about, trying to get a better sense. Yes, we can provide a lot more information about what we have done. We have a local steering group that meets quarterly, and we report against an in-year work plan about work we've done with different partner agencies. Sophia's been involved in procuring services from Youth Connect South West, so we have an increased level of detached youth work, putting trusted staff into areas that are considered more risky. Sophia's also been working with Southside to introduce a lived experience mentoring scheme for some of those children and young adults. We're working at the moment with street doctors who take a harm reduction approach by offering first aid skills to children who might become caught up in serious violence. It's very much about how they can keep themselves and those around them safe, to understand how to respond if somebody is bleeding. So I think that there are a number of initiatives that we are monitoring to see what a difference they're making. But I think the real solution is not just what we're able to spend a relatively small grant on procuring to strengthen local provision, but it is about fundamentally reviewing across the partnership what we're doing and how we work together to address this issue.
Were there any specific questions for the police from the councillor at all that Sally hasn't already addressed? Sorry, are there any specific questions you wanted to ask of the police in relation to?
No, I couldn't ask a specific case about anything that's currently
I think you've covered everything then, Sally. Thank you.
Well, as I said, a lot of this I'm sure will be picked up with the knife crime task group, which I slightly assumed we will be doing, but we'll move on to that question when we get to that point. Councillor Harpen.
Right, thanks. As we transition from the Violence Reduction Partnership into the Serious Violence Duty, I was quite interested to note that we have a public health approach rather than a police approach, because I do believe the whole thing is overseen by the Police Crime Commissioner, and I just wondered to what extent the police have been involved. So, Sally, you've mentioned it's a partnership, but I wondered to what extent, and maybe our Sergeant present might like to say a bit more, to what extent are the police involved? And I noticed that there's an early intervention team which the police organise, directly working with children, and I wondered, it's probably obvious to you, how these children are identified. That's on page 70. And there are also these known hotspots. How would you identify them? I know anecdotally residents in Bath have mentioned these to me, and I think it was mentioned, this is one whole large question, about a questionnaire about seeking the voice of children. To what extent are you actually talking to our young people and finding out what actually is going on?
Thank you. Well, I'll answer some of that, and then Sergeant Anderson, who does manage that early intervention team, might want to say a few words about that. The transition is being facilitated by the Police and Crime Commissioner, but they are not a specified authority themselves under the legislation. So arguably they are leading it, but they're leading it by the consent of the specified authorities. Police is one of those and playing a very full part in all of that work. So I hope that gives some assurance about that. The identification of areas of concern and activities of concern is a multi-agency partnership task as well. We currently have a monthly meeting called the Partnership for Reducing Exploitation and Serious Violence, and any agency, any school or education setting can notify to that partnership a child or young adult aged up to 25 who they have concerns about. And the idea of that is that we share information and we seek some assurance that the concern they're raising is well understood and that there is a lead worker who is undertaking work that is addressing that concern. And where that isn't the case, then the partnership will work together to try and identify a way forward. They will look to see whether we can signpost, whether we can request a screening assessment to look at a risk of exploitation, whether we can undertake an early help assessment to look at what support the child and family might be able to avail themselves of. That meeting has also in the past undertaken a focus on place. You talk about hotspot areas. And we are now moving that work out of the main meeting into its own separate meeting. And some of that work is going to be undertaken jointly with Wiltshire Council because of specific places in our area that a handful of Wiltshire children have been travelling to and offending in. And the approach we're taking is what we call a contextual approach, and we're looking at making a very rich assessment, not just of the people in the area, but of the built environment, of the activity of professionals, of the public, of the whole situation, really, in order to better understand what changes we might need to make. That may include looking at how parts of an area are laid out, about the access arrangements, about how staff, not necessarily staff working in our fields at all, but staff in retail or other staff who happen to be in the area, how much they are aware of some of the risks and what we can do to support them to be very mindful of safeguarding issues for children. So that work is continuing as well. And then we have a third strand of work where we recognise that children are mixing and behaving in groups. We prefer to regard them generically as networks. It isn't always at all clear that we have any gangs in this area. And by a gang, I'm understanding something that's very hierarchical. I don't think most of what we're seeing you would describe in that way, but we certainly are seeing children and young adults exploiting each other sometimes, influencing each other and behaving together in ways that they would not behave in if they were on their own. And so when we identify a possible network, then our children's social care will convene complex strategy meetings and will undertake some mapping exercises to try and tease out the links and relationships between people and see if we can get a clearer understanding of perhaps who are the main movers here, who are the influences, and what can we be doing as a wider partnership to address those.
Sally, would you mind, Chair, do you mind if I ask a supplementary of Sally? So would a lot of this then be directed to the police and then this information shared with the partnership, all the agencies involved?
Okay, I'll start and then I will ask Heather to come in. Police are a very active partner in this work, and as the work's continuing, Sophia and Heather will be jointly chairing that information sharing meeting on an alternating basis. Some of the individuals that we identify are through police records, and a number of the notifications come in from police colleagues. They're present at all the meetings, so that there's a very full partnership there.
Good morning. So if I start by explaining what our early interventions team is, with the introduction of the Violence Reduction Unit, which is now the Violence Reduction Partnership, there was a police spoke as part of that model. We are a sergeant, 2 PCs and 2 PCSOs per local authority district. My team currently consists of 2 PCs. I don't have any PCSOs at this time. They've recently left the unit for other areas. We have within Avon and Somerset an app which we call ClickSense. ClickSense records all of our data, and there are apps for pretty much every aspect of policing that you could imagine. So in terms of the early interventions team, we have specific apps which tell us who have been involved in incidents which involve the use of knives or weapons. We have hotspot locations, and that's not necessarily linked to serious violence, but that can be antisocial behaviour as well. We also have a dedicated Violence Reduction Unit app, which until about 6 months ago was a very effective tool in identifying children and young people that may be involved in serious violence. The app is no longer compatible with the software on our new laptops, so we are having a bespoke app built for us as we speak, which we hope will be live within the next few months. The app identifies a harm score for children and young people and young adults, so we can go up to the age of 25 and beyond for the purposes of the Violence Reduction Partnership. And it will identify those who are on the cusp of serious violence and exploitation and those who are sort of well entrenched into that area. And we make our referrals or notifications into the Violence Reduction Unit partnership based on that app, or that's how it worked effectively. Outside of that, we use those other apps. We also have business objects where analysts actually devise a report for us. So, for example, we have missing people under the age of 18 in Baines, which comes specifically to my team so that we can review it and look for any red flags within those missing episodes to see if we need to notify them in and see what work our officers could do as sort of a first step in. Apologise if I waffle, please do bring me back if I skirt over anything. So there are many ways. My officers will review those business objects, they'll look at our logs, and our neighbourhood teams and response teams will also contact us directly if they're aware of somebody that they have concerns about. Our focus is primarily on 11 to 17-year-olds with our specific unit, and that's in relation to extrafamilial harm, of serious violence and exploitation. There are other departments within the organisation who will factor in the other parts of the serious violence duty, such as domestic violence, sexual violence, and things like that. So our specific area is the children with serious violence and exploitation. Sophia and I meet once or twice a week to discuss any children that have come to light, any issues that are arising, and we meet to discuss the PREV with Sally as well, until recently with the issues with the app. So we keep in close contact. Sophia is the data that we store, we share with Sophia on a regular basis to enable her to complete her reports and just to identify any other areas where she feels the Violence Reduction Partnership may be able to offer some assistance. Sorry.
No, thank you very much. I think that's made it much clearer for all of us. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the panel? I had just 2 small points, one which was around the partnerships, which I assume are not sort of set in stone. It sounded to me like it was a wide range of partnerships, but it was not necessarily prescribed as it would be, just these partners. So it would be nice just to have confirmation of that point. And the second question I have is a consultation with young people. Assuming that we do set up a knife crime task group, I would hope that we will be able to look at that, the questions that you might be putting to young people for our own sort of assurance that they will be addressing the concerns that we might wish to address in that group.
Thank you. There are statutory partners. They are named in the legislation and have a duty to collaborate together to produce the strategic needs assessment and the strategy, and to work together to address, to prevent and reduce serious violence. I tried to mention them just now, I can't find them written down. So it's police, local authority, integrated care boards, probation, fire and rescue, youth justice services. So they have to cooperate. And we are required also to consult with education settings and with any custodial establishments in our area. We don't have any, but through partner agencies across Avon and Somerset, we are seeking to make links there as well to consult around what we hope to do. But the partnership is, of course, much wider than that. We really value the input of our voluntary community sector. Some of those are services that the council commissions. Others are services they provide, they fundraise themselves, and we're very happy to try and integrate responses from different partners. All the groups we've outlined have terms of reference, so the partnerships are clear and the functions and responsibilities of members are set out.
Thank you, and I think that answers my question, because it doesn't bar any partner from being involved or being a potential partner.
Absolutely not, and the more who come to the table on this, the more effective our response will be.
Thank you. And then the question about whether the knife crime group would be able to look at the questions being put to young people in the consultation.
Yes, it would be good to hear perhaps a little bit more about what's intended, because we've had a discussion about this last week. But absolutely, we're very happy to share the content of our questions. We've already drafted some, but we are keen that people comment on those and ensure that we're asking the right sort of areas, but we're also asking them in a way that's appropriate for under 18s.
Thank you, Sally. Mary, you look like you wanted to come in on that point.
I think anything that we do around this whole agenda, we will always try to engage with children and young people and really get their experience and what will work for them, which is some of the work that Sophia has already been started to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, so I'm conscious that we've been going for almost an hour and a half, just over that. So is everybody content to continue, or do you want a small break?
Continue.
Continue? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. All right. I will allow a 5-minute break if everybody can be quick. So now we're all back in the room. Thank you for the for being here. I believe now we can resume our broadcast. Thank you very much. So the next item on our agenda is item 12, which is establishing a knife crime task group. And you will recall on the back of the incidents over the last year that this came up as a wish from our own group, which was then welcomed at Council's meeting of the 20th of July. I think it's also important to recognise that if we do agree to establish this group, that it needs to fit in with the work that the Serious Violence Partnership is also engaged in. So, but I will now pass over to Kerry to talk us through this.
Thank you, Chair. Just reiterating, really, this came back, this report emerged from Council in July, where members requested formally to scrutiny to look at knife crime prevention across the area. So what the report does is recommend an approach for us to do that through a task group format. The benefits of that is that it can be quite flexible, dynamic, and allow us to capture more detail than would be possible if you took it at a panel environment. Also, it can be quite the task group wouldn't meet publicly, so we can deal much more sensitively with any sort of information that we are presented. So there's a couple of things really for you to consider. Are you comfortable with the terms of reference? Typically, task groups tend to have sort of generic terms of reference in so much as that they'll look at what we're currently doing in an area, look at best practice for an area, and then come up with recommendations for what we think could be potentially adopted going forward by the cabinet or cabinet member. Are we comfortable that it's a task group is the correct approach? I don't think many of you will potentially have been involved in a task group through scrutiny previously, or a task and finish group, so you're not, they don't have to be politically proportionate. They'll elect its own chair at the first meeting, and then it works under the supervision of the panel, so it'll report back publicly with its findings to this panel, who then will endorse findings, hopefully, and then that goes over to the Cabinet lead for consideration if there's any recommendations. So I guess the things you've been asked to consider today, are you comfortable adopting this as a work plan priority? Happy with the task group approach? Your thoughts on the terms of reference? And then if there's any volunteers that would like to be involved, if the task group's approved, please do let the chair know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerry.
Do the members of the task force, task group or whatever it's called, have to be a member of the committee? Because I think it might be worth asking if the ward councillors of Radstock, Weston, if they would be involved in it, because obviously it's affected their communities quite badly.
Thank you. I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask Kerry to answer.
No, all members or non-executive members are able to be part of a scrutiny task group. You don't necessarily need to be part of the overall seeing panel.
And also, I think it's we should recognise that although it says in the paper there's a suggestion that the group is made up of 5, it's not absolutely set in stone. You know, if we think maybe 7 or a different number would be appropriate, then we can go with that. I think the important thing here, though, is not to have an overly large group then that it's where actually it may be less effective. Yes, question? Yes, of course.
It's going from this task and finish group to Cabinet and then back to us again. Is the council involved in any way? I've never had I don't think I've been part of a task and finish group in all my years. So I just don't know what the input of council would be, of councillors.
Yeah, although we've been asked by council to look into this, we do as part of our non-exec, with our non-exec hats on. So any recommendations we have would either go to the cabinet member or to cabinet. If that then in turn led to policy changes in part of, in respect of our policy and budget framework, then that would then go on to council. But we would be putting our recommendations to the executive rather than council.
And also, I think the executive is sort of delegated by council, isn't it, to take those sorts of decisions? Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Crosley.
Thank you. I think this is an excellent proposal. The only concern I have is the timing in terms of following up from what Councillor Hartman was saying. The only concern I have is the timing concerning the setting of the budget. So if we're reporting 6 months from now, first of all, it's going to take a bit of time to set up, so it won't be 6 months from now. Let's say it takes 2 months to set up, so it's 8 months from now, which is after, in my arithmetic, it's after the budget setting. So how do will it be possible to give early indications to the people setting the budget, particularly the Treasury's part of the Cabinet, that we need some allocation put inside for that budget? How will we develop what an indicative sum is for what we need, or will it just come out of that magic pot called from within existing resources?
Would you like to answer that? I can answer the first part, which is that the 6 months starts from the first meeting of the task group, so that does allow for it to be set up. But I think the question about budget implications, perhaps the practical side of that could be answered by Kerry.
I put in 6 months because what you want to keep a momentum going with task groups, because it's quite easy for this to roll on and on and on, and our task group final report doesn't come through for well beyond 6 months. But it's not rigid to that timeline. So that's just the recommendation in terms of potentially 3 months would probably be too short. 6 months maybe about right. In terms of one of the first things you probably do is when you do the scoping exercise is identify who you'd like to come along to provide evidence. Undoubtedly, you'll want to speak to the cabinet lead for this area, and I'm sure that when they come and talk to the task group, they'll be thinking about the implications as part of the future budget setting. Difficult to predict any recommendations that will have a budget implication at this stage, but I'm sure they'll be thinking about that when they talk to us.
And I assume we would also be able to ask officers, particularly senior officers, questions within that piece of work, and so any sort of indication of where we're going with that might also be apparent to those senior officers who could take it into account.
No, absolutely. We'll work closely with the officers to identify the scope of the review, and then they'll provide us lots of material about what's currently happening, and then next steps off the back of that. So yeah, very much a hand-in-glove sort of approach.
And just one more question then. Our task and finish group, the evidence gathering does not need to just be solely on council operations. It can be broader than that and include external partners or external groups.
Yeah, like you've heard today, this is pretty much, very much a partnership approach. So yeah, we'll be looking to speak to partners as part of this as well, and understanding what's taking place across a partnership rather than just, I don't think it'd be effective if we just looked at council only.
Are there any more questions, any more comments, any input from our senior officers?
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder, in light of the discussion we've had earlier in terms of the update on the papers that were presented around the work of the Violence Reduction Unit moving into the partnership, as well as the work that's underway in relation to the strategic evidence base currently, whether both of those two pieces of work could help scrutiny make a decision around is the task and finish group required, because that piece of work will be concluding over the next couple of months. And I wonder, would that be a useful approach in terms of making the decision about the task and finish group, the timing of taking a decision?
Thank you, Mary. So I think we'll consider that as we discuss the various recommendations. So, and Sally?
Yes, I wanted to make a similar observation and also to remind panel that we're working to a legislative deadline of the 31st of January to complete the strategic needs assessment and to publish a strategy which will be in the public domain. And of course the local authority is a key partner in that. So that would cut across perhaps the timescale that you're considering this morning.
Thank you. So bearing those points in mind, I'll just go through our recommendations. Do we wish to establish a knife crime task group panel? Okay. I'm getting nods all around. We can vote on all the recommendations as a whole, can't we? Yes. Do we endorse the proposed terms of reference as outlined? Is there any additions that we would like to make at this point? Okay. Are you happy to delegate authority to the panel chair, i.e. myself, and to Vice Chair, Councillor Hardman, to finalise the task group membership, which we'll obviously be working with Kerry on as well. Okay. And the final recommendation is that the task group's findings and recommendations are reported back to this panel for endorsement within 6 months of the first meeting, but we'll also take into account, obviously, the other requirements, of that legislative work as well. Okay, everybody happy with that then? In that case, then may I ask that we all vote for all of those recommendations, so all those in favour of those recommendations? Okay, thank you very much. And as that was unanimous, I won't go through the rest of the against and abstentions. So, thank you for that. I would like to take this opportunity, though, to say a massive thank you to Sally Churchyard. I believe this is probably your last, it may even be your last official public meeting. Yes. For all the work that you've done, not just in this area, but for over the course of many, many years. Obviously we've worked together for a long time, so everything you've done has been very much appreciated. So Sally is leaving us. She is retiring from the council. So can we wish you well for everything that you do after your retirement. I'm sure you'll be watching with interest our progress on all the things that you've been involved in. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for your kind words.
Okay. Wow. So now we will move on to our next item, which is the support for child young carers. And this report comes from a suggestion made during one of our agenda setting sessions, and so I will ask Mary to introduce this item, and then we can run through any questions as well. So Mary, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this report has been prepared by Dee Chadha, who is one of the local authority's strategic commissioning officers, who has overseen both the contract and the development of the strategy for young carers across Bath and North East Somerset for the last number of years. So the paper details quite a good strategy that's been co-produced with young people, with the Carer Centre, which sets out the priorities for the Young Carer Service. As a local authority, we have delegated to the Young Carer Service the responsibility for undertaking the assessments of the needs for young people who may be providing care to either other children and or to their parents. It's a service that's run in partnership and with young people very much at the centre of identifying what their needs are in association with the Carer Centre itself. The report gives an overview of the services, the types of activities, the range of support that are provided to children and young people through the carer service, which includes short breaks, some activities, a range of wellbeing groups, a range of family events, and then of course there is the opportunity for one-to-one support as required. The service has worked really hard to support the provision and to raise the profile of the carer service with all of our education settings across the area, so that schools would be able to recognise if they've got a child in their provision who is a young carer, so that they can also be supported. D makes reference to two specific local organisations, Winston's Wish and We Hear You. Winston's Wish is based out in the south of the area. And again, they provide quite significant support where children have suffered a bereavement. I believe a panel previously were inquiring around what was the level of support that was available to children who were carers who may have suffered through a bereavement. So both of those are really excellent resources that are available for our young people. I just went on to Winston's Wish myself just last week just to check the provision, and it's a really, really good local resource that's available. In terms of the statutory considerations, obviously children and young people under the age of 18 have got to protect the characteristics under the Equalities Act, and any child has a right to ask for an assessment up until 18, and then of course once they turn 18 they can ask for an adult care assessment in terms of their needs and what they're supported. I would welcome panel to have a read at the strategy. It is very detailed, and we review delivery against that strategy, and we'll be very happy to take back an update in relation to that. There are 6 key priority areas that Dee has asked us to have set aside of, which is around the recognition of young carers in all of the work that we do, what support young carers need, help understanding what they need, and always involving children and young people and young carers in discussion. And of course the final then is around transition. Obviously our young people who have caring responsibilities will transition into adulthood and may need ongoing support. The paper does identify the financial pressures on the service, and the service has always match funded around supporting young carers in transition. The Care Centre have been very successful with the lottery and other funding sources to match fund what the local authority puts into the contract. But the paper does detail, as do a lot of our services, in terms of the impact of inflation and the cost of living over the period. So that is contained within the report for panel's information as well. It is a really well-run service. Our children and young people are very well supported through the service, and I'm happy to take any questions the panel may have.
Thank you, Mary. Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Mary. Could you clarify first how young carers are actually identified and who does the identification?
There's information about the service that's made available to everybody, including schools, about how to identify and inquire about whether somebody is a young carer, and then they'll be referred through into the carer centre itself. They would undertake the assessment. So the service does a lot of promotion around what it covers, and it regularly goes out into schools and settings to promote, because that's where a lot of young people would be identified, and or they can self-identify. Their family can self-identify and be referred in.
So at the moment there is no other way that the young carer would be identified unless a school refers, or unless they refer themselves?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I mean, just personal speaking, as a head, I may have been very fortunate in 20 years of no staff coming to me and saying they think they have a young carer. Maybe we didn't have all the information, or maybe, but also may have missed and wondered if there's anybody else that's picking this up and how that all works together.
Do you want to speak to the School Standards Board?
I think the example would be a school because that's where a young person spends a lot of their time, but that wouldn't preclude anyone else, like a school nurse or a GP or anyone else, picking up on those areas and making that referral to the service. I don't think it's just the onus on the school to.
Okay, I can understand that, but also that they can't just worrying that there is no sort of particular point where young carers would necessarily be pinpointed down in a particular way.
If I can, each school is encouraged to identify a designated lead so that they can practice from an inquisitive point of view in terms of inquiring if young people within their setting need that level of support.
Yes, I can understand that, but also understand that I just think it just sounded very hit and miss, as opposed to, is there any other way of being able to positively identify these people, whether any other services or anything else might be involved. Because again, I've known situations where schools are the last to be told about things, and it's one of those things that if somebody has identified it somewhere else, would be very helpful for them to be the first to be told as opposed to the last, or to be undertaking detective work or happening to come across it.
What I should say, it's also advertised on the Early Help app and is advertised on all of the council resources in terms of the support that's available to children and families. So it's widely advertised across all of our promotional materials.
Thank you. I share Kevin's, concern actually, but there will always be those that will fall through the gaps who, because they're not perhaps accessing those services, may not be picked up. So perhaps that's something we can explore more. But in the meantime, Councillor Harding.
Thank you. I was wondering, do you have any information on the gap between the age at which children become carers and when they're identified?
I don't have that information to hand, but I can certainly find out that information and report back to panel.
Yeah, that would be great, because often there's a several-year gap between kids being recognised.
I can report back on that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Just picking up Kevin's point about the age. So you say up to 18, but as corporate parents, we're now responsible for people up to the age of 25, and I just wonder if we need to extend that age range to people up to the age of 25, because if you are going to college, or you're studying, or you're getting a job, and the parent is in care, needs care, and you have to care for them, and you then lose them. That would be overwhelming, and to have no support around you at that point in your life when you lose your parents. I mean, young people today, you need a lot of care up into their mid-20s for lots of reasons. So if they then lose parents, that's a massive implication. So how do we do something around that age group, 18 to 25, that it would be really, really stressful?
If I may respond, so what we would have, in those instances, we'd be working with the adult service in terms of undertaking an assessment through transitions, in terms of looking at what those needs would be post-18. And there are many young carers that would be supported post-18, but they'll be supported through the Care Act eligibility in terms of from an adult perspective.
But again, going back up, how do you pick that up and how do those people know? Because you get to the age of 18 and you're told you're an adult. And if you're then, the people around you, everything falls apart. How do you know how to find those services?
Well, generally, our practice would be that if you're known to a social worker or you're receiving support through the care centre and your needs are identified, you would be working with, that young person would be supported through adults in terms of a transitions assessment and identifying what their needs should be. And we operate within the local authority. We have a transitions panel, and we'd be looking at identifying those young people who would have care and support needs, so there would be a timely assessment through 18.
Did you want to come back on that, Jo?
I'm just not satisfied with that answer, and I don't know why I'm not satisfied. It's not personal, but I just feel that just recent events that have happened to me as an adult have been awful, and I just think if that had happened to me between 18 and 25, how would I have coped with it? So I don't think that answer is supportive enough to that group of people.
Perhaps Mary can take that away and give it some thought.
Very happy to. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Haldane.
Thank you. I sympathise and I agree with all the concerns that have been expressed about how we identify young carers. And I just wonder, is there any way that we can encourage schools a bit more? Apparently, we just encourage them to offer proactive support to young carers. That's when we know who they are. And I think the big question for us and the Young Carers Support Group and the Young Carers Centre is maybe how do we find out better who actually is a young carer? Because I think they probably hide it, just in case their mum or their dad or whatever is taken away or they're taken into care. And the figures show that 25% of carers, I assume this is nationally, age 11 to 15 regularly miss school. I mean, is this one way in? Because as a council, we still look after children missing education, don't we? So maybe that is one way we can look at the fact that if children are missing school regularly because they're staying at home to mind carers, maybe that's one way in. I think we should ask schools to be more proactive. I know they're all academies, but still this is something that we can do because it's, as Joanna was saying and Kevin, you know, for a young person to be a carer, it really reduces their life chances, which maybe they can never ever make up on. And then my third point would be very worryingly about the funding, and it says here that the funding has been, and maybe I've got this wrong, it's being funded through providers' reserves, how it's not sustainable. So are we saying the money for our young carer service is not sustainable, that you know, the staffing cannot be increased anyway, but that it may well be cut? And I just wondered, Mary, could you, reply to this?
Yeah. So if I pick up on a couple, and Chris may want to come in about schools. So each year, the Young Carer Service go out into schools and they deliver training directly to schools in terms of, recognising and supporting to recognise. And there is, and we've also taken a report through the School Standards Board. So we will continue to do that. It's also widely promoted across all of our early help services and all of our commission services. But there is always more that we can do in terms of promoting a service. In terms of children who are not attending a school, I'll just ask Chris to comment in terms of the Children Missing Education Service. Do you want to pick that one, and then I'll come back to the funding?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up, and it follows on from Kevin's question really about there's a wide range of professionals who need to know about this service, not just schools, but particularly those people who might come into contact with children who might be missing school. And the Attendance and Welfare Services, it was formerly known as the Children Missing Education Service, is one of those services which will advocate and know about this service, and the officers will be able to make referrals or talk to schools if they think this is a child who is missing school through the Attendance and Welfare Service. And equally so, the service is promoted through GP practices, promoted in via school nurses as well, so people who would have contact with those children and young people. We will always talk to schools and provide them advice on that support. But you're right, it's a much wider responsibility than just our schools, and it's the responsibility of those who are having contact as well. And it's a service which I can remember referring to a number of times, many years ago, when I worked as an education welfare officer and working with schools and talking about that level of information that you have. But you're right, we need to keep promoting it. We'll keep making sure that schools are aware of it, because we need to make sure that these children are identified as soon as we can.
Just ask a supplementary before Mary comes back. I've actually just remembered that my surgery sent out one of these text messages to all people in their, all their patients to say, do you know a young carer? Do you know a person who's a young carer? Let us know. And this is the way forward, isn't it? that we just don't use GPs, but maybe we use other agencies to contact the public to say, and this is one way maybe of identifying, who they are. It was very sensitively done from my surgery. I assume, I don't know, has it gone to everybody else's? My surgery just very proactive. But I think that maybe we could start looking at ways of finding out who these young carers are, because I think they're hidden. I think there are a lot of them, and I think they're remaining hidden.
On the matter of the budget, we will have to take that through our budget setting this year, because we have had representations around the challenges around the current budget envelope for the service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And I think that's a really interesting point, a really good example, actually, of proactive identification. Kevin?
Just wondered, Chair, if there was any way, because I'm sure you have regular meetings with the ICB, where this is something that can be put on that agenda to move forward.
Thank you.
Another good suggestion. Yeah. Thank you. Just one more question then, which is really about how young people, if they are going to self-identify as young carers, how they navigate our often quite challenging access arrangements. Perhaps, has anybody asked a young carer to go through our websites? Actually, is the information they want, is it easy for them to access? Have we thought about presenting this information as an app for young people? And again, are we have we asked a young carer for their input into that as well?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that back and speak to the Commissioner about getting some assurance around those areas. I think that's a really good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Chris. Okay, any more questions on that item? In that case, then, I believe we were asked to note this paper. Are we happy to note? Yes? Thank you. And I think you need to go. Okay. So our second to last item is the Schools Capital Programme. And again, this is a paper for noting. So I'll just ask Chris and Richard. I'm so sorry, Richard. I just had a complete blank there. If there's anything that you wanted to add in addition to what's already on the paper.
Keep forgetting I've got to do the microphone. I'm just going to sort of introduce and just explain the sort of changing nature of the Schools Capital Programme to some extent. In the past, there's been a lot of funding to provide new places for schools, etc. So under the basic need element of funding. This is changing, it's not changing, it's just the fact that our pupil numbers are plateauing, and therefore the resources that were being allocated are reducing quite dramatically, and in the current financial year our allocation is zero for under basic need. So because we've got effectively enough places for our pupils. However, we still have responsibility for maintenance for the 4 remaining maintained non-VA schools, but that allocation is 179,000. Draw your attention to that. However, the big change is the increased resources that we're now getting under the special needs banner, primarily linked to the sort of financial pressures that we're facing in special needs and high needs block of the dedicated schools grant. And that additional resource has been very useful in a part of our SEND capital strategy to develop more local provision for special needs, along with the allocation or the agreed position of a new free special school for Baines, and hopefully, when we hear, a new AP school for Baines. So there's quite a lot of changes going on in the structure of the capital programme itself, shifting far more now towards special needs provision, and the report itself covers quite a large range of new projects, including resource bases at quite a few of our schools, so that we can, should we say, support the needs of special needs children more locally.
Thank you, Richard. And perhaps, Richard, you'd like to introduce yourselves to the panel.
Sorry, Richard Morgan. I'm the Education Business Manager, so responsible for education capital, schools finance, admissions and transport, etc. All the operational sides of education. Sorry.
Thank you. And you have also, I think, answered my question about whether we have yet heard about that funding for the AP school. So I guess the answer is still no. How frustrating. Panel, questions? Councillor Crosley.
Yeah, first of all, this is excellent news for all our for disadvantaged kids. I remember several years ago when I when I was leader and I made the decision to close 3 old schools and build the new school up at Odd Down for children with special needs, and that was one of my proudest achievements as a leader. So it's great to see all this stuff coming through in SEND, but my question is, for a new school, 3738, it doesn't seem much. So how have you evaluated that need? I presume you're assuming you're going to get the site for free or from existing council sites, because if you have to buy a site, then that's going to be difficult. So I just really want to have pressure a bit on how you got to those sums and that, an assurance that you feel that that's enough money.
That is a small residential special school, which is not as particularly large in so much as it has. We're planning, hopefully, for somewhere around 16 residential placements, with an additional probably 20-odd day placements. So it's not a particularly large school. But you're right, we are looking at whether or not we've got any local provision for site. It is that is the, should we say, the refurbishment cost, and we are looking for sites as we speak to try and confirm whether or not we can build that sort of provision for that sum of money. You're right, that is not a large sum of money. It's what we were allocated by the DFE for the purpose.
Would it be on purpose so they could challenge you to build it cheaply?
No, that
That's a joke, sorry.
Yeah. So see, that's what they allocated us as part of our special needs sort of bidding round, which was actually quite favourable compared to many other local authorities. So we welcomed the money, should we say? But you're right. It is going to be a challenge to try and create the provision for the sums that we are looking to try and do, and we will need to identify land or buildings that can be refurbished.
So in 37, does that mean that you haven't got the money for this 120 co-education?
No, that one we do. That is the DFE's free special school. So that is 120 place provision that the DFE will build for the local authority. They are responsible for finding the site and building the provision.
Right, so they will build it?
Yes, that's right. In 38, it's a separate provision with a much smaller, which is a part of our local SEND capital strategy. So to build a small therapeutic sort of residential placement to try and host some of the more complex needy children, so that we can provide that local provision.
So do we have, sorry, is it all right to carry on?
As long as you don't make this into a conversation.
Yes, sorry.
I'm all for these brand new schools for these children. It's absolutely wonderful. I remember one of the effects many years ago when we built the three-way one. It was so far ahead of the game in terms of what the country was providing. We had people moving to Baines just to get into the school. Now, we've got a waiting list of our own here, and our first responsibility is to our kids. So how do we know that we're going to
Councillor Crossley, could you put your microphone on?
So, yeah, sorry, did you hear that first bit? So how do we know that we're going to get our kids in first, or if we're building these fantastic schools, or are our authorities around the country now building these schools for these children?
Well, I think to some extent you've answered your question yourself there. Whilst the law states that we can't, should we say, control the provision for our own children, we have to allow other authorities' pupils to come and attend should they get a place or be allocated a place. What is happening is that around the whole of the Southwest is a large SEND capital strategy where there are multiple free schools being built in various locations. And the Southwest Strategy Group, I think that's what they're called, have sort of coordinated some of this with the DFE so that there's a sort of a better provision in more local areas so that the children don't have to travel into other authorities' areas. This, we believe, whilst there will be some cross-border traffic, it won't be significant.
Thank you. Is that everything you want to say? Kevin, I think you're next.
Thank you. Exciting times. Can I just clarify, just for my own benefit really, as far as the Council's capital programme, like St Kenya and various other things you mentioned, coming from Section 106 and the Two Rivers, is that all fully funded from either government or S106 contributions? Is the Council actually putting any of its own money into this?
Within the whole of this paper, every single item is funded through government grant, Section 106, apart from one item, which is the Bath College campus, where there is some local authority resource being allocated specifically to that, because it does affect adult social services as well as children's social care. So there was a crossover between adults and children. So there was some council funding allocated to that particular one. That's in item 3.13 on the paper. That's the only one where there's local.
Great, thank you. And the high needs capital allocation funding given to the local authority, is that based on formulas, and does every local authority get this as a formula? Are we just very lucky to get this huge pot at the moment, or is it all down to your hard work and bidding?
Well, it's two things. There's been a change in the way the DFE allocate that resource. So which has benefited names. So that because it is a formulaic approach to SEND, but it also takes into account the fact that the provision that exists in names, and because we had no AD school, only a small number of individual special schools, it actually ended up creating an additional resource for names as part of the sort of the formulaic approach. So it's so we say so that detriment in the past has paid dividends now in the allocation of the sector. Additionally, because we've entered the DSG Safety Valve programme, there was a further opportunity to bid for additional resources. And as part of that bidding, Rosemary in the SEND thing bid for the individual therapeutic residential division as part of the programme, and we were allocated £4 million under that, which was in a sense on top of anything else. We weren't expecting that. We weren't really expecting any real allocation.
No, which is great news. Thank you. Just one other question, if I may, please, Chair, and that's related to RAC. First of all, I understood there may be some further investigations going on, just to be totally certain that there's nothing involved in the school estate, and presumably the MATs are doing the same to give you reassurance on that one as well, because presumably you have overall responsibility if a school falls down on the children. I don't know, but I'm just putting that one out there. Secondly, will the expenditure on RAC by the DFE, they say there's no new money. The DFE is saying this is not going to, the Treasury is saying there's no new money, it's coming from DFE existing resources. Will this impact, and in what ways might it impact on any capital money already going out, or is that all sacrosanct and ring-fenced and all this will go ahead regardless of RAC?
The answer to that is, who knows, is the answer to that, to be honest. But quite simply, the political speak has been that it won't affect allocations that have already been notified. So everything that is in this paper has been notified. What we don't know is what it might do to impact future allocations. As far as I'm aware, we don't have any RAC in any of our schools, and I don't think we've got any concerns, and there's no further investigations, I don't think. We are going to carry out further investigations based on the updated advice, not because we believe it's there, because none of the surveys we're obliged to do each year to look at the condition have highlighted it, but the DfE's latest guidance is that we should take further investigations using suitably qualified RAC structural engineers to ensure that there isn't. So we will be, on our 4 maintained schools, carrying out further intrusive surveys to try and see if it's there or not. We don't expect it to be, because we've had no evidence that previously, in the past, it would be there, but we need to make sure. The multi-academy trusts are doing the same, so I guess if you're a RAC engineer at this moment in time, you're going to get a lot of inquiries. We are not responsible for the condition of those buildings. The multi-academy trusts and the academies are responsible for the day-to-day conditions of those buildings, as well as the health and safety reporting to the DfE of those buildings. What the DfE have said is that they will notify us of any academies which do identify as having RAC. At the moment, there are none that have been identified by the DfE to the local authority.
Right, so at the moment, although I appreciate that Matt's may be responsible for the upkeep and anything else, plus day-to-day health and safety and things, there is this question mark that was in discussion whether the council still has overall landlord responsibility for those children in those schools, and what's the sort of timescales involved, because RAC engineers are more scarce than dodos at the moment. What sort of timescales will all this be sorted on, or are we still trying to find engineers to confirm this?
I don't know is the answer to that one in relation to timescales and availability and when it would be completed. A lot of that would be driven by the availability of those people do it. We've commissioned our own, we're starting to procure our own individual reports, and I'll get some sort of indication over the next few weeks what sort of availability we've got. But as for the whole of the Baines schools and how long it will take them to do it, we don't know that.
Well, I strongly expect then some update in both our cabinet members' reports on RAC, because obviously there are implications we understand for hospitals as well, aren't there?
I think there's been questions to look at a lot of public buildings. It won't just have been schools which would have been built with that material over the years. There would be any number. And I don't mean this one.
I think we're right in this particular one.
There is, I should just say that as well, there is a particular time scale when that building material is used more than others as well. So I think the Guildhall is probably fine.
Let's hope. Okay, Liz. Councillor Hartman.
Richard, can you let us know if one of the sites being considered is actually the Culverhay site? The Cabinet member, Paul May, did actually hint, no, he didn't hint, he said one of the free schools would be using the Culverhay site. So are you allowed to update us on that?
The free special school, the site is being identified by a company called Located, which is part of the DfE, and they have come up with two, shall we say, possibles, which are in the Keynsham area.
But also you have the AP school, which, if we're successful with the bid, that will be located on the Culverhay site.
Right, it's a 120 pupil site, 120 pupil intake, I believe.
I can't remember the numbers on the AP.
The special school, which located looking for, is 120. The AP school is 55.
So therefore it wouldn't take up the whole of the Culverhay site?
No. Not the AP school, no, we wouldn't.
Thank you. And I think it's useful to hear that the the two free schools, special schools, which I think are to address a need in Keynsham, actually are to be cited in Keynsham. Thank you. Any more questions on this paper? Otherwise, are we happy to note? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your input into that. And now we move, I believe, on to our last item, which is the panel's work plan. Kerry, would you like to just say if there's what's on our next agenda? Because obviously that has a focus on adult health and social care. And then also what might be already on our agenda for the following one, which obviously is the children's panel. Yes.
I think we agreed earlier that we would look at the response to the budget question in November, or pencil that in for discussion. So I've got that, noted that. So in terms of the next meeting, which is the 9th of October, so it's coming around quite quickly, we've got the update on the adult social care transformation programme, so the HCRG insourcing. We've got a response to the peer review, which I think is happening imminently, or happening as we speak. So we're going to get an update from officers on that. And then we requested an update on the staffing position across care homes within the area, including the ones that we commissioned. So we've got 3 substantive items as it stands now for October.
Thank you. Was there anything else anybody thought ought to be on that agenda that we're not already considering? Okay. Jo?
Brilliant that you've just said that, but there's nothing written down. All our paper says what's going on from the 18th upwards. We don't have anything further that's listed. Could we actually
that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, but could we actually have something written that's a bit more timetabled over the next year so that we can see something rather than nothing and then come to this meeting and think, well, what is there? And then to be given something. It's very hard to then think about what options there are if you have that no information until now.
We'll make sure that is that the work plan in future is more populated.
I think in terms of, because we obviously had our first round post-election, and then there was the summer recess, so yeah, I appreciate it's a bit reactive as it stands, but yeah, the intention is then that we'll start we're working off the executive forward plan, and then it'll be much more long-term in terms of the items that we present on that item, yeah, sure.
Thank you. And then can we just look at what's coming up on the children's panel, which, as you say, will be in November?
Well, as it stands, we've got the single item which we requested this morning. So yeah, we'll organise an agenda setting meeting between now and probably just following October the 9th, and meet with the officers and understand anything priorities coming forward in regards to decision making, but also is like if there's anything else from a young people or children's perspective that we can discuss now.
Well, I think at our previous meeting on the 10th of July, we did also I asked for something around children's exploitation, so sexual exploitation, but also county lines. And I think that also picks up some of the points that were made earlier around knife crime as well. I appreciate that perhaps will be being looked at in more detail during the safeguarding panel, but it would, I think, be useful and of interest to this panel as well. Is there any other things we might like to consider, maybe not necessarily, those two meetings. I know we had spoken before about vaccinations and the vaccination programme, particularly around COVID, and obviously there's a lot of interest, a lot of concern around how that is being rolled out, but also what happens in schools, whether or not that might contribute to more outbreaks. I think, David, you raised this before, Councillor Harding, so...
Yes, we saw a lot of school absences last year, didn't we? We saw record school absences, and we saw a 50% increase due to infection, and it was the leading single cause of prolonged school absences. So it would be interesting to look at whether we can commence a bit of work looking around how clean air and CO2 and air filtration and windows, etc., are managed within schools. Because there's also the possible ongoing health concerns of repeated COVID infections. So I guess we could have a discussion around whether we want to start looking at that as a piece of work. I don't know. I don't know how this process works. So,
well, we could certainly look at what is already provided within schools. This goes back to, maybe 18 months ago, conversations about those monitors, air quality monitors that were being put into schools. So perhaps we could look at a report back on their effectiveness, as well as what the position is at that time around infections and absenteeism. Yeah. Okay. Of course you may.
We always look at children's attainment, but that's always in March, I believe, because although the children have passed all their exams or not, and the results, they've got them by September, but by the time they're verified, I think I see people nodding over there. So obviously that would be in March, I believe, and looking at closing the gap, between those children who are disadvantaged and their peers who aren't. That would be another big thing, but I assume that would be March. Chris will probably...
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Some of the data is out there, but it's non-validated. So if you remember last time, I brought an unvalidated set of data here in October, I think, November, which when the data was validated, which I brought back in March, was roughly the same, but there were some quite significant differences as well. So I think it's really important we stick to the looking at the validated data, but also within that we can look at any gaps which we're noticing. So from panel members last time when we came here, we were specifically looking at the key stage 2 gap around free school meals, which from looking at some of the national messages around it, feels like that might have slightly narrowed, but we need to have a look at that in Baines. But that was the specific noticeable gap. So we can certainly bring that back in March.
I think within that piece of work it'd be useful to see what the impact of COVID has been, particularly on our key stage 4, I think, groups as well, in their attainment. And then just picking up on one point that was raised in July, I think we also wanted to look at homelessness health as well. So that could be very relevant to have, if it's not too late, to call for that on the October meeting.
Yeah, I'll speak to public health colleagues around, and probably housing as well, to see whether...
Okay, so I'm not seeing any more hands shooting up about other things to put on, but obviously if things occur to you after this meeting, then please let myself, the Vice Chair, and or Kerry or Mark know, and then we can make sure that is included as soon as is appropriate on our panel's work. So without further ado, I would like to say thank you everybody for your attendance, to our officers for their attendance, and their fantastic willingness and ability to answer all of our wide-ranging questions. And thank you, obviously, to Mark and to Kerry for their work in ensuring this meeting happens as well as it does do. So thank you very much, everybody, and I will see you all in October, if not before.